In Chapter 4 of these demonstration videos, we're going to discuss and demonstrate on real data the capital management of long-tail lines of business. We've selected a number of companies from AM Best, Schedule P 2006, that includes Berkshire Hathaway, Hartford, Swiss Re, and a number of other companies. You will see that no two companies are the same in respect of volatility for the same line of business, and nor are they the same in respect of correlations between LOBs. And the reason for this, I guess, is that each company writes a completely different mix of risks and therefore has different risk characteristics for the same line of business. In Chapter 4.1 of this video, we're going to look at issues of process correlation and what constitutes common drivers between lines of business. Correlations play a very important role, and they need to be calculated actually accurately. They have a large influence, a large impact on the risk capital requirements. Later on in this particular chapter, in other sections, for those selected companies, we are going to design composite models that measure the volatility within each line and the correlation structure between them. And you'll see that kind of one double click loads the composite model, reveals pictorially the volatility structure of each long tail LOB in your company and their interrelationships, correlation structures. All the critical financial information is computed in a matter of seconds. A company-wide report can be created effortlessly with a single report template. We'll also show how you can update a composite model. A composite model applies to a composite triangle group, which comprises all the individual triangle groups, one triangle group for each line of business. We'll look at capital allocation by LOB, by calendar years, measure reserve risk, underwriting risk, and the combined reserve risks. So in this particular chapter, just a couple of issues to do with correlation and common drivers. So we're going to look at this particular example. Actually, this particular example concerns gross versus net data, net of reinsurance data. And obviously they have common drivers. So what do we actually expect to see in terms of model structure? What kind of process correlation do we expect to see? So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to run the model twice. It's the same model that relates to these two pieces, gross data, net of reinsurance. Let's do that. So I've run the model twice, so we've got two runs of the same model, and then we're going to look at the, on the right side, we'll look to the gross data, so I'll click on the gross tab. On the left side, we have the model structure for the net data. If you look at the trend structure along the calendar years, you can see that it's very similar. A change in trend in a particular calendar year for one is mirrored in the other for the same years. If you look at the development year structure, you'll see it's very similar. And if you look at the accident year structure, except for the early accident years, as you would to, it's a very similar structure. So there you've got two pieces that have a very similar trend structure. Now, what else is very similar between these two segments is if you look at the residuals, you will see that they're very highly correlated. That's the process correlation. So on the right again, we have the gross data. On the left, we have the net data. And you can see the ups and downs here, and the residuals are mirrored in the other set of residuals for the net data. If I do a trace of 06 in each case, in other words, the residuals for the calendar year 2006 for the net and the gross, and look at it via accident years. Why don't we remove the points in each graph? And you can see that's pretty highly correlated. The ups in one are very often replicated in the ups in the other, and similarly with the downwards. For instance, you can see it's relatively high here in the year 1996. If we move there, 1996 is also relatively high. I mean, we could look at the time series. If we're going to look at a time series, here are 4 time series. And you can see this is a time series, the red and the blue, 2 time series. And you can see the red and the blue here, the correlation is 0. In this graph, the correlation is 0.5, though they're starting, the ups and downs are starting to sort of mirror each other. And this is a correlation of 0.8. This is a negative correlation. So if we look at this, in fact, the correlation, the residuals, if we check that out, is 0.85. So that's pretty strong. If we now go back and look at the calendar year residuals, what do we mean, just as a refresher, what do we mean by high process correlation? Typically, if you've got 2 segments, then the probability that a number is above the trend line or below the trend line is 50% either way. If the 2 lines are independent, or the 2 segments are independent, then you've got probabilities above the line, the trend line, or below in a particular cell, 50% each way. But if they're highly correlated, you're actually saying that if a number in one cell is above the trend line for this segment, then the probability that it's above the trend line in the other segment in the same cell now is much higher than 50%, and that's what we call process correlation. If now we actually only have 1 calendar year trend for each segment here, so we just have 1 calendar year trend, I'll bring back the points, and you can see the very high correlation. So we're now looking at the correlation, not just the process correlation, but because we've only estimated 1 trend in each segment, we're also looking part of the similarities of the correlations in the trend structure. Now what I'd like to say is I've never found this, we haven't found this between 2 lines of business. And these are not really 2 lines of business, these are net of reinsurance and gross, where you know there are common drivers. They are driven by the same factors or the same variables. So very often net and gross have very similar trend structure, and they have very high process correlation. There's no need to model them independently. In fact, it's the modeling wizard that created the models here, and it created very similar models. If we now load the models again, because this is where we only assumed 1 trend along the calendar years. So let's load it. Okay, very similar structure. All right, we don't see that between lines of business. If I close all the triangle groups, now let's look at Berkshire Hathaway first. This is just a subset. We just extracted this from the AIM Best Schedule P data database, which you know that if you've got the CD, you can import it immediately into an ICAFIS relational database. That doesn't take very long by the name of company. What we actually did here was created a new database, and we transferred the pieces from the AIM Best Schedule P into this much smaller database, and it's just to make it much more easier, I guess, to navigate. If we go to Berkshire Hathaway, actually let's go to Composite. If we go to Berkshire Hathaway, Composite, BH, we can look at CAL and PPA. Oh, where's CAL? There it is, CAL and PPA. If we run the model good, and we run the model good again, so we're doing 2 runs of the same model, and let's just see if we look at the residuals. So PPA now is on the left, private passenger automobile, and commercial liability is on the right. You can see the trend structure is not the same. The calendar year trend structures are not the same. Two pieces of business that have completely different volatility. If we now look at the residuals to see if there's any process correlation, and we'll look at that versus that, very hard to see anything here. Some people would argue, well, isn't there a trend there? I guess we can always put a parameter there. It doesn't really make much difference. If we do a trace of this year versus that year, this is for Berkshire Hathaway, you can see there's no correlation here. There's no discernible correlation here that you can't see in these ups and downs in these middle blue rivers. But let's look at a trace, and you look at that versus that, and you really can't see any correlations. I mean, it goes up here, it goes down there, then it goes up. Well, over here it goes down a bit, down more, then up there. So there's no discernible correlation. If you measure the process correlation, it's essentially zero, or it's not significant. Now, that's not the case with Swiss Re. If we now turn to Swiss Re, Swiss Re, SR, composite, let's go to CAL and PPA, run model good. Let's do it again, same model. We've just got two views of it, two runs of it. Let's make it S. PPA, private passenger automobile, is going to be on the left. Commercial auto liability on the right. A little bit of similarities along the accident years, some similarities, but that's already in the model. If you look at the calendar years, they're not the same. If you now look at the residuals, you will see some correlations. A little bit, not very strong. Now, between that and that, again, that's hard to see, but if you do a trace of 06 versus this 06, you might see a little bit of correlation. Okay? In fact, you can see this very strongly here. Agree? Very strong there versus this. Okay? So there are some correlations there, and the correlation here is 0.53. So what we've seen so far is two lines, commercial auto liability, private, Berkshire Hathaway, no process correlation. Swiss Re, some correlation, 50%, 0.53, 53%. And also we've shown you net versus gross that have common drivers, especially along the calendar years, which means they'll have common drivers along the calendar years in the future, and they had very high process correlation. So very similar trend structure for the net and gross, and very strong process correlation. And as I've mentioned before, you rarely find that. In fact, I have never found that between two lines of business. So this concludes the first video of Chapter 4. Thank you.